Hi everyone, welcome back to the Stitches and Scribbles channel. My name is Erin, and today for the podcast, since I don't have any whips or finished objects to show you, we're just going to be talking about some knitting books from my crafting library. I do have two books today I'm going to show you that are, one of them is definitely not knitting, the other one is in between, I guess. So really this is just all of the books that are not crochet books that are in my crafting library. I do have like art and drawing books as well, but I'm not going to bother showing those on this channel because I don't really use them anymore. But yeah, other half of my needlecrafts library, let's say it that way. I do actually have one, I can never remember which way to point. One finished object behind me, that is my crocheted fairy wings from my video from Friday. If you haven't checked out that video, make sure that you do, because I think that this was a super cool project and I'm really excited to style it for Renaissance Fair costumes. Since we're on that topic already, I'll just give you like a little bit of a preview. I am planning quite a few, well, at least 3 more Renaissance Fair costume piece vlogs on this channel, so you can look forward to those. One of them I kind of already, or 2 of them I already talked about because I purchased the materials and talked about that in my last podcast episode when I bought all of that cotton yarn, so you can check that out if you want to see exactly what I bought. But I will be making a couple of different hats for the Renaissance Fair, and I have another project that I decided on that I don't know if I talked about in a previous podcast or not, but I want to do a amigurumi butterfly dragon, so that will probably also get its own video. So if you're here for the Ren Fair DIYs and craft projects, those things should be coming up in the next couple of months, as well as hopefully a video of just how I styled all of my Renaissance Fair pieces. So can look forward to that. But let's dive into some of the books that I have sitting out. I actually learned how to knit before I learned how to crochet. I learned how to knit back when I was in about 4th grade, because I actually was a volunteer at our local historical society in the town I grew up in. This town had like a little historic village with a couple of old houses and a reconstructed one-room schoolhouse. So we, in 4th grade at the schools I attended, it was a big deal in 4th grade that you got to go have school for the day in the one-room schoolhouse. And after doing that, I kind of fell in love with it. I was a big American Girl doll fan, especially Kirsten, and it was, I don't think it was exactly the time frame that Kirsten is supposed to be in, but it was close enough. I was Kirsten for Halloween in 1st grade, I think, so big American Girl doll fan. But I ended up volunteering and helping give tours at the historic village. I started just kind of giving tours of the schoolhouse because I was a kid, but as I got older and did more events with them, I did the tours of the schoolhouse because I was the closest in age to a teacher that would have taught in a schoolhouse like that, being like a teenager. But when I was younger, some of the ladies who worked at the historical society taught me how to knit, so that I would have something to do in between tours that still looked authentic, but so that I wouldn't be bored just sitting there waiting for tours to come in. So some of the knitting books I have, I know I got very, very early on. There's actually one book that I cannot find, but I wanted to talk about it because it's the one that I vividly remember being the first knitting book that I purchased. I remember picking it out at Barnes & Noble, and it was called Hip to Knit. It's probably in my house somewhere, and I just haven't found it yet. We moved back in fall of last year, and there's definitely still a couple of items that like I know are in the last couple boxes that we have, and I just haven't located them yet. So that book might turn up at some point, but if you, and I should have looked up the author of that book. It's definitely not available at Barnes & Noble anymore, but the book is called Hip to Knit, which is a fairly unique title, so I'm sure you can find it from Amazon or from a used bookstore. But I highly recommend that one because it was a really good beginning knitter's book. I think to the point that I didn't even appreciate it as a kid because a lot of the techniques were not what I was going for. Like when I first started off knitting, I was only making scarves and American Girl doll blankets, and going back to American Girl. And that was it. So I was really just making rectangles. But I do remember that as I picked up more knitting skills, there were some pictures in that book that were really, really helpful. I also know that it had a great pattern for a beginner's cardigan and a beginner's pullover. It had like directions for your first pair of socks and your first pair of mittens. It was a lot of good like basic projects. Like if you were looking for like trying to make your first pullover or your first cardigan, I think there was even like a hoodie sweatshirt pattern. It had really good patterns for stuff like that. So I wanted to just talk about that book even though I can't find it. I hope I didn't get rid of it. But I think I wouldn't be surprised if I did because there was a very long period of time where I wasn't knitting any garments. Other than like scarves and hats. So I might have gotten rid of it at some point thinking that like, oh, I was never going to knit a sweater. And now I have. So it may have disappeared forever, but I'm fingers crossed that I can still find it someday. So let's dive into the books that I do have. The first one actually came with my Addie knitting machine, and this is the one at the beginning of the video where I was like, I don't know if it counts as knitting. I'll leave it up to you. But this book is called Winding Instead of Knitting, New Instructions for the Addie Express King Size Knitting Machine. I have not made any of the patterns from this book yet, mostly because I already had a Centro by the time that I got my Addie machine. So I kind of knew how to use the machine to design garments, but it has a lot of like actual like look like real knitting pattern designs in there. This one's a summer sweater. The only thing that I noticed about this book that I'm not nuts about is it doesn't seem very size inclusive. And that's partially because the Addie knitting machine is only one size. But it'll tell you for some of the sweaters just to like make a panel with all of the pins available. And for someone with a bigger build or is plus size, like that's not going to work for you. But you can always graft more than one panel together from the knitting machine. But I wish that they had more specific instructions for that. But there's some patterns for little scarves, some decorations, some hat patterns. There's even one for like a lampshade cover. Definitely lots of scarves. There's even a knitted skirt. I'm kind of looking at the skirt directions now, but it actually doesn't have any sizing on it, which is kind of funky. I didn't notice that before. It also has some projects that you can felt to make little organizer bins and stuff like that. So very, very cool book. Just keep in mind that it kind of has that issue with not being size inclusive, but this just came with my Addie knitting machine. So I would assume that you can probably find just the book from Addie's website or from Amazon, but mine just came with my machine. But since it was on my shelf, I figured I should talk about it anyway. So it definitely has very good directions in it if you're new to using the Addie machine. I wasn't because I'd had a Centro before I purchased my Addie. But the directions were really, really helpful, especially because some of the labels on the Addie machine are in German. So it tells you kind of what to look for, which was very nice. The next one I have was actually given to me from a friend who was cleaning out her like craft book stuff, but I'm pretty sure I checked this out from the library as a kid or maybe had the kit. But this is the knitting book from Klutz. If you grew up in the early 2000s like me, you probably saw the whole rack of these books at Barnes & Noble every time you went. I don't know how long Klutz was making kits for or if they are still doing that. But there's like tons of these Klutz craft books at used bookstores. But this one I would also say, just based on the directions, is a great beginning knitter's book. Even if you don't purchase the kit, because I think it originally came with yarn and like knitting needles and stuff. And obviously if you just have the book, it doesn't. But there's lots of really cute projects in here. There's hats, there's a scarf, there's a little flower. There's like a cell phone pocket, which like the cell phone that they show in here is very funny now. Definitely a flip phone, which tells you how old this book probably is. But it does have really great picture directions that are geared towards kids. So if you have a kid or a kid in your life who's interested in knitting, a book like this is probably what I'd recommend for them. Even if you find beginning knitting books for adults, the fact that books like this that are meant for kids have so many pictures in them is going to be really, really helpful. The next thing I have was also from that friend who was cleaning out her craft supplies. It's called the Knit Knack Kit. And it's actually not a book, it's a bunch of little cards with like knitting patterns on them. So this one also would probably be great for a beginner. This one still has like the knitting needles in it that it came with, as well as a couple of little stitch markers. And it has a little book of like basic knitting directions, but then the rest of what's in here is just these like cards, and some of them open up depending on how long the pattern is, but there's stuff in here from like socks to baby items to sweaters. I see a leg warmer pattern in here, scarves and things. So this would be, I like this design idea. I kind of wish that more knitting things came in this format, because the idea of just taking the one little pattern card around with you instead of like an entire book is kind of nice. But I have seen this exact kit at Half Price Books a lot, so I think it was very popular at some point in time. It doesn't seem to be that difficult to find. I'm guessing it was originally one of those Barnes & Noble kits. So Barnes & Noble probably has something similar now, although I've noticed that the Barnes & Noble craft books now tend to be very niche things. So like kind of fandom based, or like there's a lot of like character amigurumi kits at Barnes & Noble. So I don't know if they have a good like basic knitting or basic crochet kit anymore, but there's plenty of the like books and resources from those kits at used bookstores or even at thrift stores. So finding a beginner's knitting book or kit like that is probably not too challenging. If you're looking for one, I can't really speak to either of the previous two things I showed specifically because I didn't use them. But I would say if you're looking for a beginner knitting book, whether it's for yourself or for somebody else, really look for something that has a lot of pictures in it, because that is really helpful for learning. That is why I generally prefer to learn new techniques off of YouTube instead of from a book. But if you're someone who prefers a book, or if you're buying it for a kid who maybe doesn't have the unrestricted internet access that adults do, books with lots of pictures or books that are geared for kids are probably the best way to go. Now we're going to kind of get into some of the more advanced knitting things. I'm going to start with my knitting directory. I have used this a lot, and in my crochet books video I talked about how I like craft books with this structure where it can open and sit flat because it's spiral bound, and this is definitely one of those. This book, I have a lot of like little tabs and things in it, although it does come with tabs. But I have used this for a lot of basic stitch patterns. I used this a lot when I was planning my Dungeons & Dragons knitting series because I could look up different stitches. In fact, I think some of the tabs in here are from when I was working on that D&D series and looking for some stitch patterns for some of my items. But for each pattern, it has a picture of what it looks like and a couple of lines of how to do that pattern specifically. So this is a really great resource, especially for pattern designers, or if you're someone who likes to do things like simple scarves or hats or pullover sweaters and you just want to look for a different pattern to sub in when you're making those designs. A book like this is going to be really great for you. This is definitely not so much a beginner's book, although it does have like plain garter stitch and stockinette stitch in it. But because it doesn't have as many pictures, it's probably not great for like a super beginner. Like, I would get this for someone who already knows how to like knit, purl, yarn over, and like doing a knit two together decrease. Because it doesn't have a lot of pictures for that, at least like paired with each stitch pattern. There's definitely a reference at the front where you can kind of look at stuff like that. But again, there's not like a ton of pictures of how to do like the basic knit stitch, but it's definitely great for pattern design or just for switching up basic patterns that you really like. Same thing with this book. This is the Knit Stitch Dictionary, and this has way more stitches in it. And this one, I actually like that for each stitch pattern, there is a picture and a chart. I'm trying to show one that's not like super specific to this book, because there are definitely some that they like created for this book and some that are more general knitting patterns. So I'm trying to find one of the more general ones that like people would know how to do anyway. Directory of stitches. So I guess the early ones, oh, they do have little teeny charts at the bottom, but you'll see kind of a bunch of stitches across the top. This is kind of like the crochet stitch dictionary that I have, but they'll put similar types of stitches together. So like this section is all like knit and purl stitches with no other stitch designs in them, but it tells you like what multiples you need, what the row repeats are. It has the like little charts at the bottom if you're a chart reader. So I really like this one, but again, it doesn't have a lot of directions on how to actually do like a knit stitch versus a purl stitch, or how to do a yarn over or anything like that. And the patterns do get quite complex as you go on, like you get into stuff that looks like this. So definitely not great for beginners. This is more of a, you already know a lot about knitting stitches. Oh, I guess there is how to read a chart and like the basics in the back. But again, I would use this more as a reference for an intermediate to experienced knitter if you're looking to kind of add some pizzazz to your projects. I do really like stitch books like those two that have a lot of great visuals of all the different patterns you could pick. That's why I have some for crochet and some for Tunisian crochet as well. Because if you want to do kind of a project with very simple shaping, it's fun to experiment with the stitch that you're using to add some visual interest to it. My next two knitting books are ones that I don't think I have actually knit anything out of either of these either, but they're both so like niche interest that I remember getting them partially just because it was funny. But I do want to make things from both of these books. The first one is Charmed Knits Projects for Fans of Harry Potter by Allison Hansel. This one I have had since I was very, very young because someone, I think, bought it for me, not realizing like how difficult these projects were. Let me flip through it. I feel like I have made something from this book. I just don't remember what it was. But it's a bunch of patterns inspired by the knit pieces in the Harry Potter movies. So like you've got a cardigan inspired by Mrs. Weasley's house sweater that she wears. There's a pattern for a little owl plushie. There's a pattern to make a robe, and a wizard's hat. There's some like recreations of actual items that people wore in the films. There's wand cozies. There's all sorts of stuff. It's hard to find ones with, okay, so like this, like the Quidditch uniform sweaters are in here. I know that there is a newer Harry Potter knitting book as well as a Harry Potter crochet book. Oh, I made the scarves from this book. That's the one thing I've done. I know there's a newer Harry Potter knit and crochet book that came out just in the past year or two. This one is much older than that. I'm trying to think. I should just look at what the copyright date is. 2007. So it's quite old at this point. But I really like this book as well. In fact, I think I've flipped through the new crochet and knit Harry Potter books, and I like this one better. I don't know if it's because it's like, it's not that it's simpler, that it has better pictures, but it's more like classic Harry Potter, if that makes sense. I've kind of talked about this in one of my previous episodes of the podcast where I just went on a whole Harry Potter rant. But to me, there's like different eras of Harry Potter fan material. There was stuff like this that was all the like unofficial Harry Potter things before the like Wizarding World brand came out. Like before Pottermore, I think is kind of the dividing line, and I'm sorry if this is like too much niche Harry Potter stuff for people watching, but stuff that came out before Pottermore I think is better because it was created by fans and seems a little bit more genuine versus something commissioned by like the marketing group for the Wizarding World brand or the Harry Potter brand. Like, even, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, if you've seen, see, this is, I don't know why I go on these tangents, because then it just becomes a challenge to, like, explain what I'm actually thinking. But there was a point where Harry Potter stopped being just something that, like, people enjoyed, and it became very much a money-making thing. So I kind of, definitely when Pottermore came out, but I remember being excited about Pottermore, and I think Pottermore for the first, like, couple years of it being out was pretty cool with, like, the house quizzes and stuff like that, and all the, like, hidden lore to Harry Potter, but then it kind of became very, like, how much can we squeeze out of this fictional universe that's going to continue to make money? And that's when things stopped kind of being as fun. So if you can get your hands on this and you are a Harry Potter fan, I do highly recommend this book. In fact, I think I need to revisit this and try to make some of the things from this book, because it's a lot more of the, like, the charm of, like, the first 2 or 3 Harry Potter movies in this one. But yeah, there we go with another Harry Potter rant. This is like the old school Harry Potter fan-made material. I have an old Harry Potter cookbook that's kind of the same way, where it's called like the unofficial Harry Potter cookbook. And it feels more like cozy and nostalgic than some of the like newer branded Harry Potter like activity books or craft books feel like. But I'm gonna stop talking about Harry Potter now so that I can finish getting through my stack of books. The other kind of like niche interest knitting book I have is the Nativity, and this is by Fiona Goble, Goble. And it's exactly what it looks like. It's knitting patterns for all of the people who would be in a nativity scene for Christmas. So I bought this clearly because it was 50% off at some point at Barnes & Noble. But I do want to eventually make a nativity scene using all of the patterns in this book. But they're all very tiny and very detailed, and I love that they like show parts of the story with the little knitted dolls. But eventually I would like to make a full knit nativity scene. Also because these are, the way that they're constructed would be appropriate for a child to use because they don't use any buttons or anything. I guess Mary has a button on her dress right here, but that looks kind of optional. And they have wires for the halos, but those could be left out as well. But it would be a nativity scene that would be appropriate for a child to interact with and play with. So I think eventually this will be on my list of things that I want to make, whether it's for my own children or for a relative. What is this in the back? There's like a hidden pocket back here that I didn't know was in here. What is that? Well, I can't get it out, but I'm peeking through and it looks like it's like the cutout pieces to make a little stable or something. So that's hidden in the back cover of the book. That's kind of neat. Oh yeah, there's directions in the back of how to put it together. Oh, it makes the manger. That's what it is. But that's pretty neat. So this will eventually be on my list of things that I want to knit. But there's a lot of characters in this book. We have all of the wise men and Mary and Joseph and the shepherds, some sheep, a donkey, baby Jesus, and an angel. So it would be a lot of pieces. That might have to be something where I knit like Mary, Joseph, and Jesus and then just add a couple of characters each year instead of trying to do them all at once, because I think all at once would be far too much. The last book is not a knitting book, but I wanted to make sure that it was included in one of these podcast episodes because I'm so excited about it. This was something that my husband got me for my birthday, and I think I've already shown it in the podcast at some point, but this is the Creepy Cross Stitch book. I fairly recently have gotten into cross stitch, and I don't do it all the time. It's kind of a good backpack project for me while I'm subbing because it's so small and easy to take with me. But I really like cross stitch designs that are fun and unique, and these are all kind of spooky. So a lot of the elements in these designs are like bats and skeletons and moons and black cats, but they're all still very cute. Like, I absolutely love this sunroom design with all of the like little plants and things. So that is also on my list of stuff that I want to get to eventually, but I have to finish the cross stitch kits that I already have before I can start one of these, but I'll get there eventually. So that is the rest of my needlecrafts library, again with the exception of that one book that I can't find. I also feel like there must be a couple of crochet books that I couldn't find either, because I think that there was another one that I realized I couldn't find, but I can't remember what that one was. So I might have more knit and crochet books to show you eventually if I locate them. I know for sure I'm missing that Hip to Knit book, and I can't remember what the crochet one is that I think I'm missing. I think maybe I had another flower book at some point, but who knows. This is the problem with having moved so many times in the last 10 years. Stuff is kind of just goes into weird boxes when you move. And how many times have I moved in the last 10 years? Okay, if we count college, I had 3 different living spaces in college. I had 2 different dorms my freshman and sophomore year, and then the same apartment junior and senior year. I had an apartment for my first 2 years of teaching, an apartment for the next 2 years of teaching, an apartment when I got married, then I was at my parents' house, and now we're here. So 8 different living locations in the last 10 years? Well, close to 11 years now, because I graduated high school in spring of 2012. So that's a lot of moving things around. So I'm sure that there's stuff that has gone missing over the years that I'll find eventually, assuming I didn't donate it by accident. But I think that's going to be it for this week's podcast. I'm sorry I don't have any whips to show you, and my only finished object you already saw because it has a whole dedicated video. I'm still very much working on my one shawl project, but I didn't really have a lot of time to work on it this past week, so I didn't feel like it was necessary to show you. I also had just kind of a busy week last week, even though I didn't have any sub days because it was my school's Easter break. It seemed like everybody else was also on break, so all of my friends wanted to do stuff. I went on a very long and very fun walk with some of my former coworkers from my full-time teaching job. I saw a different group of former coworkers for drinks one night. I'm seeing a different group of former coworkers this week. One of my friends moved back in town, so I'm seeing her on Friday or Sunday. The infamous bridal shower that I've been talking about for months and months is this weekend, and I finally finished all of the prizes that I was making for that. So not a lot of time for crafting, unfortunately, other than what you've seen in videos, but a lot of very fun things are happening now that it's getting slightly warmer out. Although today it's actually snowing, even though yesterday it was 80 degrees. So that's just Wisconsin. But hopefully I can get some warm weather crochet projects or warm weather craft with me videos coming soon. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the podcast. If you liked what you heard today and want to see more crafty videos or listen to me talk about more crafty things, make sure that you hit the subscribe button down below so that you can be notified of all of my future videos. If you want to follow me on other forms of social media, that information will be in the description box below as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.